So, session 12, we're going to start Exodus, the new book. Yay. I always get excited. All my other Bible studies, whenever we start a new book, I get really excited. But when the previous book ends, I get real sad. Like you'll see, on session 33, I feel really weird when the Torah session ends. Yeah. I feel like personally attached to it. So, again, we use the Greek name Exodus, which when the Greeks translated the Tanakh, the Old Testament, and made what was called the Septuagint, they called the book Exodus. And we have that word in our language. It's a going out. It's a leaving a place, is an exodus. In Hebrew, it's called Shemot, which means the names. And we're going to see in a second why it's called the names. But in this case, I think the Greek word for the book is cooler because it's a going out. It's going to be a going out from Egypt. The last couple sessions were how the people got to Egypt, and now 400 years goes by. I mean, Joseph's been dead for 400 years. Jacob's been dead for a little over 400 years. So a long time has gone by. And 70 people go into Egypt, and 600 and some thousand men come out of Egypt. So not counting women and girls and boys under 13, there's probably 2.5 million people that come out after 70 people went in. And as we're going to see, that's going to present the problem for the Egyptians because there's so many Hebrews now that freaks them out. And then because this is going to be used in the Exodus, because God is going to deliver them, it's going to become, and as we go through the book, we'll see how it's going to become a foreshadowing of Messiah because they're going to be delivered from the slavery of Egypt. And then we're delivered from the slavery of sin by Messiah. So Moses is going to deliver them. He delivers us. And you also have to keep in mind the other main parallel as we go along is these people, all they knew how to do was to make bricks. I mean, they were slaves. They didn't make weapons. They didn't train an army. They didn't start guerrilla warfare. They didn't start killing Egyptians and doing terrorist attacks. God says, get a lamb, do this, and you're out of here. And probably some of them said, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. But when they did it, they were out of there. So they're sovereignly delivered, just like we're sovereignly delivered from sin by the blood of the Lamb, capital B, capital L. So we're going to go through all that in painstaking detail. And this is, of course, written by Moses. It's one of the books of Moses. There's no question Moses wrote it, and that he wrote it while they were in the wilderness. And Moses, of course, as we're going to see, he's born to Hebrew parents. He's saved by being put on the river. He's raised in Pharaoh's house. He's educated in Egypt. He spends his first 40 years in Egypt. Not like living in some hut somewhere growing anything. He's grows up in the palace. So he's educated. He's, military guy. He's strong. He's intelligent. And so he knows all the ins and outs about life in Egypt. So when he writes these books, he can really tell you about Egypt. So the population of the Hebrews increases. They're living in the best part of the land. Their population starts to increase. And this is 400 years roughly after Joseph dies. And in the process, we don't know exactly when, they were enslaved because the pharaohs were worried that there were so many of them. And so we're going to see here in chapter 1. And the other thing to keep in mind as we go through this, actually the rest of the whole lesson up through session 33, is that the rest of the book is going to basically take place in the wilderness. So the old covenant is made in the wilderness, in the desert. The new covenant starts with John the Baptist preaching in the wilderness, in a different place, but kind of still begins in the wilderness. Doesn't begin in the temple. And since we're at this Christmas time, it's kind of interesting to think of the place and the circumstances that Messiah is born in. The people that are there, the town, the sort of simple, poor circumstances. You would think Messiah would have been born in the temple or in a nice big rich house, maybe near the temple. But so that's the introduction. So pretty soon, remember, up to this point, there's no law. As we've talked about people making altars and sacrificing to God. We don't know exactly what they did or how they did it, but there's no law. There's the concept of the Sabbath. Circumcision's been introduced. The 8th day to circumcise and name the boy has been introduced, but there's no law yet. Paul tells us in Romans that the law brings the concept of sin. So when you have the law, then you know if you violated the law. So the law becomes kind of the mirror we look at ourselves in, and we say, ooh, I'm not as good as I thought I was. I mean, there's only 613 of them, so it should be easy to keep them all. I mean, at least for the first 20 minutes. Then after that... So the reason in Hebrew it's called Shemot, the names, is you see in... We're not going to read them all, but you see chapter 1, verse 1. Now these are the names of the children of Israel who came to Egypt. Each man and his household came with Jacob. Then it names the tribes. And there were 70 persons, for Joseph was in Egypt already. And Joseph died, all his brothers, and all that generation. But the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. So their population is growing like crazy. So because the first sentence says, now these are the names, that's why the book's called Shemot, the names. They call everything, Jews call everything by the first word or two of a prayer or a scripture or a book, or that's how it's named. It's kind of like when we say the Our Father. That's not really what the prayer's called. It's actually called the Lord's Prayer, but we call it the Our Father because that's the first two words of the prayer. So the population increases. Now remember, that was the first promise to Abraham. You're going to have lots of descendants. But now he's got a lot of descendants. He started out with dopey Isaac. He had one descendant, really, not counting Ishmael. Now, 70 people go into Egypt, and they increase in population over 400 years. Now, humans can reproduce a lot in 400 years. Sometimes I think about that, like when Columbus discovers the New World, or let's say when the Spaniards showed up in the New World, there were like 1 million people living in what is now the United States. There were only 1 million Native Americans living in the continental United States. And then there were maybe, a few million Aztecs, a few million Incas. And now look how many people live in the Americas. Now, that's not all by reproduction, but, a lot of it is. So humans can increase. That's why when people debate, like, how many people were there before the flood? Oh, there couldn't have been that many. Well, actually, there could have been a lot. So in verse 8, we find what the problem is going to be. So somebody want to read starting at 8? Anybody. Or else I'll just do it. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Now think about that a second. The Pharaoh that was Pharaoh when Joseph was there loved Joseph, put him in command of everything. He was governor of Egypt, second in command only to the Pharaoh. It said nobody could move a hand or a foot in Egypt without Joseph's permission. The Pharaoh was close with him, and then the Pharaoh was excited when Jacob and the other family members came, gave him the best place in Egypt to live. Now there comes a Pharaoh who didn't know Joseph. Like, what are all these people doing here? Where all these people come from? And he said to his people, look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and it happen in the event of war that they also join our enemies and fight against us, and so go up out of the land. So we got all these people here that aren't Egyptians, and there's more and more of them. Can we really trust these people? What if there's a war and they join our enemy? They're inside our country. We got to do something about this. Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens. So they made them slaves. And they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were in dread of the children of Israel. So they enslaved them as one possibility. Remember, Egypt's a very mighty country at this point. The empire is very powerful. So they enslaved them. It doesn't say exactly when. But they've been there for a little over 400 years already. So even when they're enslaved, their population keeps increasing. It says, so the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, and mortar, and brick, and all manner of service in the field. All their services in which they made them serve was with rigor. So they just made them do all the hard work. We're going to build a new pyramid over there. So let's go, guys. We're going to need lots of bricks, and we're going to need the foundation dug, and we're going to need the whatever, and Pharaoh's storage cities, and but that doesn't control the population. They keep increasing in population. Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other Puah. And he said, when you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew women, and see them on their birth stools, if it is a son, then you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, then she shall live. So the solution is we just kill the boys. We'll let the girls live, we'll kill the boys. And eventually, that'll be it. Fast forward a couple of thousand years, King Herod, well, if there's another king, I'm the king of Israel. Everybody's talking about a newborn king of Israel. So if I kill all the boys in that area, that's going to take care of the problem. I mean, I don't know, I guess, if you see the horrors of what happened in the Holocaust, which is just unspeakable. I mean, to think that you're going to go into a place and you're going to kill every boy who's 2 years old and under. I mean, how horrible would that have been? I mean, soldiers come to your house, kill the 1-year-old kid, go on to the next house, and but the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the male children alive. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said, why have you done this thing and saved the male children alive? And the midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are lively and give birth before the midwives come to them. Oh, when we get there, the baby's already born. So, we're not gonna kill him then when he's already born. So they deceive Pharaoh. So, Jacob did a lot of deceiving. These midwives doing some deceiving. Does God approve of deceit? No. But in this case, it saves lives. Hebrew women. These were the Hebrew women. Yeah. And it mentions two of them, but there must have been more than two if you have all these people. Yeah. Yeah, no, they were. Therefore, God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very mighty. And so it was, because the midwives feared God, that he provided households for them. So Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. So now we're changed. We're not going to kill them at birth. Whenever you find a Hebrew boy, you're going to throw him in the river. Now, they don't give an age cutoff because Aaron lives, but Moses is going to be killed. So Aaron's a little bit older. So maybe it was the 2-year-old thing like Herod does later. We don't know for sure. So he orders the boys thrown into the fire, the girls, into the river. The girls you can let live. See, that's chapter 1 already. And now we're going to get the birth of Moses, Moshe. He's given an Egyptian name, which means brought out of the water. You can't, from now till the very end, we'll be talking about Moses. There's no end to talking about Moses. Even after he dies, you talk about Moses. Jesus talked about Moses. Moses was the lawgiver, the covenant, mediator of the covenant. You can't overemphasize Moses. God says, I talk to Moses like you talk to a friend. I'll never talk to anyone like that again. God tells Moses, I loved Abraham, but I never told him my name. I told my name. God loves Moses. And Moses is always referred to as the servant of God. Even in the Revelation where it says, in heaven we're going to sing the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb. Moses is always called the servant of God. So he messes up one thing, and he's not allowed to go into the land. One thing. I can't even believe it. But anyway. So in chapter 2, we're not going to read all of it, but we'll read some of it. And a man of the house of Levi. Okay, so now we already know they've preserved the identity of the tribes through 400 years. And thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people being born. This guy knows he's from the tribe of Levi, which, of course, is going to become important in not too many more chapters because they're going to be the priests. And no other tribe could be a priest. And they're going to be God's inheritance, and he's going to be their inheritance. And when they get to the land, they're not going to get land because God is their inheritance. And a Hebrew boy, when he's growing up, knows that he's going to work, quote, in the ministry, as we would say. A Hebrew boy can never say to his father, a Levite boy can never say to his father, I think I want to be a computer engineer when I grow up. Because the father would say, no, you're going to be at the temple, you're going to be at the synagogue, you're going to be at the whatever it is, because that's going to be your job. Your job might be to keep the candles lit. Your job might be to bring the incense to the certain priest. Your job might be to go get the high priest stuff ready. But your job is going to be in the ministry. You might run the youth group. No, probably not. You can organize bingo. Oh, no, they don't bingo. This is a tough crowd. Jordan, not even here. And a man of the house of Levi went and took as a wife a daughter of Levi. So the woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark of bulrushes for him, daubed it with asphalt and pitch, put the child in it, and laid it in the reeds by the river's bank. And his sister stood far off to know what would be done to him. So she hides Moses for 3 months because he was cute. And so then she can't hide him anymore. He's too big. Now, notice he wouldn't be weaned yet at 3 months. This is going to enter into the story too. So she makes the famous little basket with bulrushes and pitch and puts him in the river. His sister, who's Miriam, who we're also going to hear a lot about coming up, kind of goes along the river to find out what's going to happen to the baby. Then the daughter of Pharaoh. Now, see, isn't this great? How God plans things. The daughter of Pharaoh, the daughter of the king, not some random woman who happens to be at the river to take a bath or get some water or wash her husband's shirt or something. No, the daughter of the Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river. I always thought of the Nile as being like dirty and disgusting. You guys have probably been there. Yeah. I always thought of it as kind of dirty and disgusting, and like who would go get water there and who would take a bath in it. Great for the crops, though. This was the life of Egypt. I mean, they worshipped the Nile. And this is why, the first sign was water turning into blood. Because it hit the Egyptians hard because this was their whole life, was this river. And then all of a sudden it turns to blood. That makes an impression on you. And her maidens walked along the riverside, and when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. So she had compassion on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrew children." First of all, he'd have been circumcised. Second of all, he would have had a Hebrew blanket. This is one of the Hebrew children. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you?" You're going to need what they used to call a wet nurse, because we can't go to Drug Mart and buy formula. There's no Gerber's, anything. You got to find a woman who can feed the baby. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." So the maiden went and called the child's mother. So she goes to the Hebrew place, Moses' mother, she calls, to come and feed the child. So God arranges Moses to be saved, Pharaoh's daughter to find him, and then his own mother to nurse him and have contact with him over a long period of time. And then maybe even when he was a toddler and was talking and was starting to think, she would be there influencing him, telling him about the true God and so forth, even though he was an Egyptian official. We don't know all that because it doesn't tell us that. But, we know from the book of Hebrews, in chapter 11, which is called the Hall of Fame of Faith, that Moses' parents were Amram and Jochebed, and they were both Levites. They're mentioned in Hebrews 11. And so she hires a wet nurse to feed the baby, and it's Moses' mother, who, as we would say, knows the Lord in the sense that she knows the God of Israel. And she's feeding the baby who's her own son. So how cool is that? And the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So she called his name Moses, saying, because I drew him out of the water. So he's given an Egyptian name, Moshe, which, if you go to the synagogue, you hear over and over again every Saturday morning. The only thing I never understood is all the times we've been in Israel and all the places we've been in Israel, I've never seen a street named after Moses, a building named after Moses. Nothing is named after Moses. You can find a King David Street in every little town, but there's nothing named after Moses. I never could figure that out. But anyway, I guess it doesn't matter. So the setup is he's protected in the royal, you're growing up in the royal house. Nobody's going to mess with you. Now, Pharaoh, of course, has his own natural children, including the guy who's going to be Pharaoh when we get to the Exodus, who's kind of like, not related to Moses, but they're kind of, step related. I don't know what you'd call it. They're step related. So, when they went to the gym or swam in the pool, they would have known that Moses was a Hebrew, so he probably covered himself with something, because that wouldn't have been good if everybody would have known he was a Hebrew. And we don't know if Pharaoh's son would have known that or would have seen that or not. We don't know. When it doesn't tell us anything, we can only assume. So he grows up in the palace. And he has, if you're the, if you're, he's basically, well, let's see, Pharaoh's daughter, she adopts him. So Pharaoh's basically his grandfather, step-grandfather, or whatever you call it. So, if you're the grandson of a Pharaoh, I mean, when you walk around outside or you go someplace in your chariot, people are going to say, "Ooh, it's the grandson of the Pharaoh." It's like, the queen's grandson. You don't just say, "Oh, there he is." You say, "Ooh, it's the queen's grandson." Prince whoever. So he has this like royal upbringing. Now he has to know, again, we don't know what his mother taught him or how long she had contact with him, but he knows he's not an Egyptian. We don't know what he's thinking. And this is, of course, going to become very important because in verse 11, now it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown that he went out to his brethren and looked at their burdens. So for some reason, we don't know if he always did this or this was the first time he did this, he went out to see how the Hebrews were living. And he saw their burdens. So they weren't like, laying around on the couch watching TV and drinking lemonade. They had burdens. They were slaves. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So he looked this way and that way, and when he saw no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. So he kills the guy and buries him. And he thinks nobody's watching. And when he went out the second day, behold, 2 Hebrew men were fighting. And he said to one who did the wrong, "Why are you striking your companion?" Then he said, "Who made you a prince and judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" So somebody saw it. We have this in our language. Who made you judge over me? Who are you to say? Who are you to judge? So Moses feared and said, "Surely this thing is known. When Pharaoh heard of this matter, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. So the Pharaoh wants to now kill Moses because now he kind of gets the story. Moses is a Hebrew and he killed an Egyptian. So that's a capital crime. Even though Moses is 40 at this time, by the way. Moses' life is divided in 40, 40, 40. 40 years in Egypt, 40 years in the wilderness in Midian, and then 40 years in the wilderness with the Israelites. 40, 40, 40. So he was 120 when he dies, and when he dies near the end of Deuteronomy, where I get all choked up reading about when he died, it says, even though he's 120 years old, his vision wasn't dimmed, he had his normal strength and his vigor, and he wasn't like your average 120-year-old. Well, in those days, the 120 was the new 40. No. Good, everybody's laughing. This is good. Tell Jordan everybody laughed anyway. So he has to run away from his place. So, God is orchestrating everything. Remember last time we talked about Joseph tells his brothers, you didn't send me to Egypt, God did. You did this horrible thing to me, but God orchestrated it. He sent me here to preserve your life, to save you from the famine, to give you provision, to give you a place to live. God did all that based on all the terrible stuff that you did to me. So don't worry about it. What you meant for evil, God meant for good. So here, you think, wow, God's really smiling on this little Hebrew kid because he grows up in the palace and he's got it made. He's got like the second or third coolest chariot of anybody. Got beautiful white horses to take him around. He's probably got a chauffeur. When he goes to the country club or some event, it's like, oh, here he is. Bands playing and stuff. Now, all of a sudden, he's in a desert sitting by a well. We don't know. Again, like it says in Hebrews, which is my favorite book, by the way. Like it says in Hebrews, God is like a father who disciplines his children. And any father who loves his children disciplines them. And what happens if you never discipline your children? Well, it's chaos. All you have to do is go look at a inner city public school and you'll see the results of never disciplining anybody. Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So in Hebrews it says God does that because he's going to use you for something and you need to be disciplined. And at the time you're being disciplined, you don't understand it and you don't like it. So if you're a 10-year-old kid who's been disciplined and all your friends are going to a thing and you're sitting in your room and you're mad. My parents don't want me to have any fun. All the other kids are going. I hate them. I'm going to run away. I'm never talking to them, all this. But then it also says in Hebrews, when you look back on it, you usually realize why it was good, why it was necessary to be disciplined. So Moses goes from royalty to sitting by a well. Jesus goes from the riches and glories of heaven to living in a garbage dump with us. And believe me, compared to heaven, this is a garbage dump. To, when he goes to see when he meets the woman at the well, he's sitting in the middle of a desert, sitting at a well, and he's tired and he's thirsty. So the creator of everything sits down and says, I'm tired and thirsty. Get me a drink. Condescension. Moses all of a sudden is like, wait a minute. Where's the palace? Where's my chariot? Where's my servants? Where's all my cool stuff? And he's sitting by a well. Now, a lot of things in the Bible happen by wells, but we'll get into that. Did we talk about that one day? Or no, that was a different group. I can't remember. A lot of stuff happens by wells. This is one of them. You know, Jacob meets Rachel at a well. Jacob digs wells. Jesus talks to the woman at the well. A lot of things happen at wells. But, so he's in the land of Midian, which is kind of deserty. Now, the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. Okay? So it's a priest of Midian. So clearly he's a pagan priest. The only people that had the true God were those slaves that were in Egypt. Right. So this is the priest of Midian, had 7 daughters. And they came and drew water, and they filled the troughs to water their father's flock. So he put his girls to work. there was no sitting around at home. Then the shepherds came and drove them away. But Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. When they came to Reuel, their father, he said, "How is it that you have come so soon today?" And they said, "An Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds, and he also drew enough water for us and watered the flock." So clearly he still had his Egyptian clothes on. So he said to his daughters, "And where is he? Why is it that you have left the man? Call him that he may eat with us." Then Moses was content to live with the man, and he gave Zipporah his daughter to Moses, and she bore him a son, and he called his name Gershom, for he said, "I am a stranger in a strange land." So that happens. So Moses, like, man, all of a sudden he's got a wife and a kid. Now he's got some responsibilities. Ooh, it's a tough crowd. And he used to have a great job in Egypt, but I didn't have much of a job. But so this guy Reuel is later going to also be called Jethro. Jethro and Reuel are the same guy. Many people in the Middle East still to this day have more than one name. You ever see, like, when they're talking about somebody in the Middle East and they say a name and they say he's also known as, and you think, like, well, why does this guy have 2 names? You know, is he hiding from the law? But anyway, so this guy's got 7 daughters, and he gives Zipporah, one of the girls, to Moses as his wife, and have a son. And they name him Gershom, which is the Hebrew word for stranger. He says they named him Gershom because I'm a stranger in a strange land. So, you notice one thing it doesn't say? It doesn't say that he circumcised him. And this is going to be an issue a little bit later. Now, at this point, you got to cut him a little slack. You know, he's been an Egyptian. He hasn't actually been living with the Hebrews. He just, like, finds himself, like, exiled. So he's probably not thinking about circumcising the boy, but God's going to make an issue of it later. So he's a stranger in a strange land. I mean, very strange. I mean, this isn't like he used to live in Olmsted Falls and now he lives in North Ridgeville. I mean, he's in a totally different environment than he was. And so the plan is getting set in place now to deliver the people. Just like when you look through, as we go through, we saw the types and shadows with the patriarchs, with Joseph, and we're going to see a lot more with Moses. You see how the plan of salvation is unfolding, that's eventually going to come to Yeshua, Jesus, so that we can have salvation. This is part of the plan, and the plan now is going to be to deliver the people. There's going to be a plan to deliver people from slavery. Just like there was a plan, is a plan, was a plan, is a plan to deliver us from the ultimate slavery. Now it happened in the process of time that the king of Egypt died. Then the children of Israel groaned because of the bondage, and they cried out, and their cry came up to God because of the bondage. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God acknowledged them. Now, does that mean God had forgotten? Like 400 years go by, and all of a sudden he says, wait a minute, what's going on down there? How come those people are crying out? Oh, wait a minute, those are the Israelites. Wait a minute. I just remembered I made promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. How did this 400 years get by me? You know, we know, of course, that that's not true, but we know that there was a period of time where it was just meant to be this way, because there's an appointed time for everything. You know, why was Yeshua born when he was born? Why wasn't he born 100 years earlier or 200 years later? That's when he had to be born. God always has appointed times. Even the feast days are called the Moedim, which are the appointed times. You know, God doesn't tell them, well, sometime in the spring when you feel like it, you can celebrate Passover. Then after Passover, I mean, if you're up to it, you do the next one. And then in the fall, maybe you should have some kind of thing in the fall. No, he tells them exact days where every feast day has to be. I mean, the exact day, the day of the month. So everything's in an appointed time. So for 400 years, he doesn't seemingly do anything. But it's setting a stage. It's setting a stage. It's being done for a reason. Just like, now, like we're thinking, why isn't Jesus coming back today? I hope it's today. But, why didn't he come back 100 years ago or 50 years ago? Or is he going to come 50 years from now? Is he going to come next week? When's he going to? Well, there's a reason why he's going to come back when he's coming back. So 400 years go by, and then he remembered the covenant. Many times through the rest of the Old Testament, when God gets mad at the people, he remembers the covenant he made with the patriarchs and says, because I made promises, I have to keep the promises. He tells Moses that. Moses sometimes even, quote, reminds him of the promises. If God didn't keep his promises, then we wouldn't know what's going on. If he says, I changed my mind. I meant it when I said it, but now I realize that wasn't a good idea. Changed my mind. Then we don't know where we stand, because then how do we know the promise of salvation is really there? Should we follow Jesus or should we wait for something else to happen? He might change his mind. So because of the promises to the patriarchs, and it's called the righteousness of the patriarchs. Well, Jacob was anything but righteous. I mean, Isaac was nice. Abraham was interesting. But they certainly weren't righteous. Paul tells us nobody is righteous. So he remembers those promises, and he basically made them righteous, just like, and you have to excuse me for saying this again, if you only want to memorize one verse in the whole Bible, you don't really care one bit about the whole Bible, but you want to know one verse, then have it be 2 Corinthians 5:21. For he who did not know sin became sin, so that we might become the righteousness of God in him. Because we have our righteousness in Messiah. We don't bring much righteousness to the table of our own. I mean, some people are more righteous than others. But, at the end, everybody gets an F. So like I like to say, my F is hopefully higher than Hitler's F, and Mother Teresa's F is higher than my F, and Billy Graham's F is higher than my F, but we all get an F. And so as this plan's going to unfold, look what's happened so far. You have one man, Abraham, who's sovereignly picked by God, who then leads to a family, Isaac, Jacob, the 12 boys. And now you have 2 million, 2.5 million people who are stuck someplace as slaves. And now the mechanism is going to start to deliver them. Now the plan's really going to unfold. And the way the plan unfolds is even going to show us what happens at the cross. So imagine you're a slave somewhere, and somebody says, well, in order to get out of here, here's what you do. You take a lamb, you kill the lamb, you put the blood on the door. You go, wait a minute, how's that going to get me out of here? Well, got them out of there because they obeyed. Somebody says, your eternal destiny depends on a man who was executed 2,000 years ago in a horrible execution. You say, wait a minute, are you serious? Try telling that to a bunch of rich big shots who run everything. Does it make any sense? No. Paul says our preaching's foolishness. These things are foolish to the people that are perishing. But to us, we know that it's salvation. So now the plan's going to really be put in place. And it's going to show us what's going to happen 2,000, 2,500, or whatever it is years after this. Because from now on, it's all going to be about blood. Everything's going to be about blood. Everything is going to be shedding blood and blood atonement. So see, that was a cute little lesson. We got Moses born. We got Moses into the wilderness. We got Moses married as a boy. Not exactly like living in the palace, but he's living all right.